How is everyone doing? It's myself, Jeff Black, Brandon DeCruz, my co-host, Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast, episode 49, post-workout nutrition, nutrient timing, and peri-workout nutrition series part 3. Damn, this is like our longest series we're doing. It's just getting up there.
Honestly, we did a metabolism series that lasted like 6 episodes, but we are going to put the cap in the end point on this topic today because I have wrapped everything up, tied it up into a bow. And anything else to do with nutrient timing or peri-workout nutrition, I don't think needs to be covered. You know what I mean? I think
I would hope not, unless we went into. Go ahead.
No, I think we've really put together, especially in this podcast, something that's going to tie the entire concept and topic up, where people are going to have not only a basic understanding, but also a very in-depth understanding of even the nuanced aspects of this concept and why they should utilize it and what potential benefits they can get from using it. But yeah, I'm very into the series. It's things that build upon each other. And I think that's one of the biggest or best pieces of feedback that I've received from our listeners and our followers is that we're very thorough, first and foremost, but also we have things that blend into each other. So it's almost like the entire season that we've had, because we're within our first year. We're about to celebrate actually in a few more episodes, our first year anniversary, but everything has flowed in terms of concepts, in terms of big picture ideas that have been broken down into much greater detail so that they get a base level understanding, but then they get even more and more. And so that's really something that I think has been a massive intention of ours as not only coaches, but people that are educators. And we're kind of like, how we approach this podcast is very similar to how we approach even coaching our own clients. You first get them in with the basic fundamentals that they need, the high priority principles. We work on the big rocks and then we go for the smaller pebbles, but it's always big rocks first. We always have to cover what are the fundamental things that are going to move the needle the furthest and the most. And then when you want to get into these a little bit more sexy details, we can dive into those as well, but it's not without prioritizing, understanding, and really conceptualizing those big rocks first.
I agree 100%. So what part of do you want to talk about before we were going live that we were chatting about? You want to talk about Stephen Kotler's The Art of Impossible, where he was talking about having equal time to recover and what that's done for me?
So I think, just so the audience has a little bit of background information, Jeff and I have a great relationship first and foremost, and we get into a lot of engaging conversations that I honestly think we have a massive audience that are ranging from general population clients, competitors, but then also other fitness professionals that include coaches, gym owners, as well as other trainers. And a lot of times what you and we have these private conversations, which is great because I always tell you, you're a sounding board for me and we like to bounce ideas off of each other. But certain concepts or certain things that you share with me or that I share with you would really be of benefit and high value to the audience and to other like-minded individuals. So really what we were covering prior to actually, hitting record was the concept of, really rest and replenishing our, energy resources in terms of not only we'll talk nutrition later, but really from a mental currency capacity. So you were sharing with me a book that you've read multiple times and the benefits and the values and the lessons that you've learned from it. So I figured that would be I literally interrupted Jeff, just so the audience knows, mid conversation. I said, listen, let's get this recorded because you're dropping a lot of value that I think would not only benefit me, but would benefit those that listen to us.
So I have an honest reflection about next month, actually, April 4th is my 8th year in business for Iron House and my 18th year coaching people. So it's really weird that 10 years later, the universe gave me a gym. It was interesting how the timing happened, but I don't regret up front early in my business working the absolute dog hours I had to work for the little amount of money. I don't, and I'm only like $250, $300 a month for online coaching. I'm not expensive now. I run a different model than most, but anyway, it's either here or there. But when you get into the weeds of it, I had worked for literally the last pretty much since I was 18 years old, 6-7 days a week. So I'm 42. And since I started taking Saturday and Sundays off, dude, I've been more fresh. And Stephen Kotler talks about in The Art of Possible people who go through flow cycles. So you get very creative, like you create a class. Brandon creates his master class on insulin resistance. And his argument is you need an equal amount of time to recover. And I started noticing that with my check-ins. And that's how that led to that conversation I had with Lindy, my counselor, a few weeks ago, where he was talking to me about, dude, why do you give a shit about so many people who are just going to end up firing you anyway? And I was like, wow. And it really stuck with me, but I think you can relate to this when you spend all day researching like we do, really thinking because when I'm not coaching clients and email back and forth, I legitimately am always thinking about client cases. Like, shit, maybe I should try this. Shit, maybe I should try that. Ooh, that looks neat. I'm going to try that. You know, that's the one thing people can say about me. I'll try anything with someone just because I'm like, well, hell, you don't know until you try. Because that's my approach
Yeah,
to
it's almost
business.
like an N of one experiment.
Right. Yeah. And I can say since I started taking these 2 days back to back, I see why high achievers and high performers and like my CEO mentor, Eric and stuff like that, where they take these 2, 3 days breaks and they really limit how people can communicate with them and how often. And I think that that's a very, very vital thing. Like I read a book once that says you're able to remember about 150 people, and that's how like humans we're designed to be in tribes. And I can tell you from owning a gym and being known here in Nashville to a degree, not like sound like brag or anything like that, but yeah, I think people knowing me, when you own a small business, pretty popular, people kind of will say hi to you in public. I can tell you that that is 100% true. There's about 150 names I'm able to store, and everybody else is, hey, buddy, or hey, how are you doing, girl? Or whatever. So, anyway, if you're listening and you're going through these moments where you feel burned out, it's completely normal. But I think you got to get to a point where you can look around and say, okay, how do I sustain these next 5 years? And I knew I wouldn't sustain the next 5 years if I didn't change some of my habits. So that's why I'm at Saturday and Sunday, bro.
Yeah, so actually what you're referring to, it's funny, the concept is called Dunbar's number. And that is
Mm-hmm.
from an ancestral perspective, the amount of people that we would generally interact with in terms of a tribal scenario. So we generally, in ancient times or evolutionary times, we wouldn't have a tribe over 150 people. So really where we're at this interesting crossroads in today's society is that we don't have a lot of close relationships, or this is, when we look at like anthropologists and they, a lot of more psychology research and stuff, they're looking at the fact that we have a lot of like surface level conversations and relationships because we have so much interaction and engagement through social media. However, we, in terms of our tribe, we were never meant to interact frequently with more than 150 people. But think about it, I have 40,000 plus people on Instagram. You have upteen thousands of people on Instagram and other social networks. And so our brains were not really evolutionarily designed or evolved to interact with that many people, remember that many people, engage with that many people. And that's why I think it's so crucial that we have like a close network of people that we stay in close contact with, and we kind of keep in tune with that evolutionary I guess design that we have, because a lot of times there's so many people that have this big network, let's say, of people that they know, but they don't really, I don't even want to say know, the people they associate with. However, they're associates, they're not friends, they're not people that are really in their pact. So it's an interesting thing, and I know you especially, and we've had this conversation, you with names, it's over once 150 is done. And I can't say that I'm like
100%. At least
so.
I'm honest people about that. I tell people that
Oh,
all the
absolutely.
time. I'm just like, hey, the odds of me remembering your last name are about zero. Like I wouldn't remember my own son's last names if they weren't my same. I mean, I'm terrible like that. But I think that that's where you got to like start asking yourself, like, how diversified you're going to be as a business owner, right? Like I have to wear the hat of a marketer. I have to wear the hat of a mentor, a coach. I have to wear all these different hats. And then in my private life, I've got all these hats. And I think you just start limiting what you can actually store, because you always have to keep a good amount for ready of use. And I think with what we do, we have to be on point with people's emotions at an empathetic level that most people can't comprehend. I don't even think counselors can comprehend how
Yeah,
deep
I really
empathy
don't
we
think.
have to have for what we do.
Not only that, so coaching is such a all-encompassing type of role. I think a lot of people overlook it, and that's why I always say coaching goes far beyond like quality coaching. Let's not talk about your cookie cutter macro based coach. We're talking about quality coaches that really engage with their clientele, care about them, and they focus on what I will always refer to as lifestyle transformations rather than just body composition transformations. Because anyone can get you a 12-week fat loss phase done and in the books and have you go on your merry way to rebound and regain your weight. A real coach, a true coach, someone that came from a
Mhm.
background like us where we worked with people one-on-one. When I was working with people one-on-one, I had maybe 25, 30 clients that I saw at, in one block of time in terms of months and months. And that was because obviously your time is limited. And if someone's coming in multiple sessions per week, I was doing between 40 and 50 sessions, or 40 and 50 hours per week within the context of a gym. So you really create really close, deep knitted relationships with those individuals. And it's funny that we're having this talk. A lot of people don't realize how cognitively demanding coaching truly is, because you not only have to have, especially when you're doing nutrition, training, health, all these different all-encompassing topics, especially when we get into like the functional nutrition cases, which we get a lot of unique cases where people have went through the ringer, thrown their body through a lot of stress, whether it be from lifestyle or even the poor practices that they've had previously, where they've induced a lot of these negative adaptations. They have a lot of physiological limitations as well as psychological limitations due to, maybe chronic dieting, yo-yo dieting, some, poor advice in terms of maybe pharmacology and things of that sort. And so we have to have such a deep understanding of physiology from a nutritional biochemistry background, from a training and a exercise science background, but then also we have to have the art of coaching in terms of our relationship building skills, our supportive skills, our ability to empathize with others, connect with them, be there as an emotional sounding board, and not taking the role of a psychologist, but often we are the first people, we are the first line of defense, I guess, for our clientele. And I often say that with a lot of my high level clients, I'm more so pulling them back from doing things like they're often their worst enemies. And I don't mean that in a negative aspect. What I mean is a lot of them are type A individuals. They're very driven, and they're more likely to overdo things, overthink things, and overanalyze things, which are not conducive to their long-term growth, than they are to pull back when necessary. And that's where my role as a coach is to not only educate, guide them, to empower them with education, but also to counsel them on certain topics or certain decisions within their life, and also help them get a more holistic and all-encompassing view onto fitness, where we're not only integrating sound nutritional and training principles, but also lifestyle management principles, stress management principles, improving their sleep quality, even the quality of their thoughts, because that's how, fitness might be an hour a day in the gym and a few hours eating, but we have another 24 hours, or we have another 20 hours per se, that we're doing things throughout our lifestyle that's going to impact not only our body composition, but also our health. So we have to really realize, I always say this, but we cannot separate psychology from physiology. And as a coach, we bear a lot of responsibility. And so that's something that you're alluding to, the fact that you're taking more time off at this point in your career to be able to recharge and really have those resources available, so that when you do encounter a client that has an issue or that really needs your aid, that you're able to be there. And that's an interesting topic and interesting, approach that I'm becoming more open-minded to, because I am the type of person that I've shared with you. And it's funny because one of my closest friends and mentors, Joe Jeffrey, we had this conversation actually earlier this week, where we keep a smaller roster than say you do. However, we're constantly in contact with our clients. And so this limits the amount of clients that we can take on, because we, like you alluded to, we only have so much energy, like we only have so much mental currency, adaptive capacity. We only have so much time, energy that we can pour into others. And when you're really trying to give your all to people, it's difficult to do when you're unable to pour into yourself, because you're spending and allocating so much time towards others. So it's like this balancing act that I think a lot of coaches, I mentor other coaches. Many of my closest friends are coaches or fitness professionals. I think this is all like a balancing act that we're trying to like walk a tightrope almost, and just trying to get right.
I think it's just a matter of what offense as a coach you could run and handle and maintain. And I think it's just really, that's what it comes down to. Because I know that Jason runs 200 clients, and then you got Vince at 400, and you get Shelby Star. So you got teams who assist, and there's other things. But
exactly, we have to allude to that, because one person doing that, we have to almost question.
Jason does all by himself. I know that much, and he's 200.
200.
Yeah, he's all by himself.
I got to give it up to him then.
Yeah, but that's like, a lot of full-time days, a lot of da-da-da, and I know that, and that's why I respect it, but I choose to live differently than that. You know what I mean? I like to have different times. Just depends. Everyone's different. So, dude, how's your last 7 days been, real quick? And then let's get burning into this so we don't run out of time.
Yeah, so this week has been all about getting back to my normal routine. Obviously, this time last week, I was in 83-degree weather, and now I'm in a nor'easter where it's heavily snowing outside of my house. So a little bit of a difference in terms of the climate, to say the least. But this week has really just been getting back to work, getting back to my coursework, really catching up with clients, and then also starting to onboard clients again. Because anytime that I travel, whether it be for a vacation like I just did, or anytime that I'm going down to see you for a seminar, or I'm going to an educational summit or whatever it may be, I don't take clients in the time period around that, because I really do value being prompt in terms of my turnaround time and my onboarding process, which is generally 5 to 7 days, where I'm in constant contact with those new individuals, and I'm really trying to put them in a position to succeed off the bat. So I've just been now getting clients, doing a lot of consultations, and getting people onboarded this week, and that's really been my focus. But besides that, man, everything's been great. Really looking forward to the season that's to come. It's about to be spring, which doesn't look like it outside in the Northeast, but beautiful thing. But I will say that last week, seeing that I was just getting back from a vacation, I came back and I spoke about this on the podcast. I had a lot of appreciation, not only for the trip, but also what it kind of elucidated to me for like where I'm at in my life, like what I've been able to accomplish in terms of really doing something I truly love and being truly fortunate to be able to say that, because there's a lot of people you encounter. You go into a supermarket, or, I'm the type of person that I'm usually in my office at all times. And so when I do get outside and I go to the gym or I go to the store to pick up groceries, I'm really interactive with those people. And you generally see like someone working like as a cashier, they look miserable. You can kind of tell that's not like their dream. And so I try to engage with them, try to see how their day's doing. And oftentimes they kind of have like a pessimistic perspective. And I think that that could be induced due to their personality, but I think it's often the context of like what they're doing and them being unhappy with that. And we're really lucky in the regard that we have a career, we've made a career that wasn't standard, a decade ago. However, we've been able to create a lifestyle, a career, and a passion that we've been able to pursue, not only as, something that is our passion, but also as a profession that's allowed us to provide for ourselves and our families. And I came back home, and actually this upcoming week is my mother's birthday. And so I saw how much of, I guess, revitalized I felt from vacation. So I just booked her actually earlier this morning, a trip for her to go to an all-inclusive vacation. I will not be with her. She'll be going with my aunt, but she's going to be heading to Puerto Rico. It's her birthday this week, but we're going to plan it for early May. So I've already booked those tickets. I'm really happy to do so and just be able to, give someone the time, like a great time that I just had, and get that same refreshment and revitalization that I just experienced.
Dude, that's pretty cool, man. That's good of you. That's really good of you.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I'm really happy for it. I'm
fucking waiting for my gift. But anyway, let's see.
Your gift is going to be me coming down to see you.
Yeah. Oh, that's a gift. I'm just kidding. I always love seeing you. My last 7 days have been good. Jason, Coley, myself, and Aaron, we shot our first ever Q&A videos for Relentless. So we managed to do 3 30-minute videos. They turned out amazing. Some of those questions and just the way the three of us interacted with each other, they just got so deep. And so, because we all have slightly different opinions but Absolutely. Very similar.
I think that's the best thing.
It is, because people kind of get to see here broad range, and it's kind of like the consensus. We always usually have a consensus on stuff, but we just say it and go about it differently. So that was super fun. And then yesterday we did our photos for social media that we needed update our website and things like that. And then last night I took Egan to his first ever metal show. August Burns Red and Bleed From Within, Devil Wear Prada. So he had a blast. So
dude, that's so dope.
Yeah, no, it was cool, man. It was cool to give him that experience as dad. And I've been able to do a lot of cool stuff with him. So I know when he gets older, he's gonna be like, damn, I got to do a lot of shit, when he looks back on it. So with that being said, I had a great time.
No, I got it. And I'm always one to give credit where it's due. And I got to commend you. You have stepped in as a role as a father, like immensely, especially in the last year. And honestly, every time that you share with me the experiences that you've provided or had with Keegan, the places that you brought him, whether it be like going to these professional wrestling, like WWE, or going to, Tennessee State football games or whatever it may be, like these are such exciting things. He's a young kid. He truly deserves it because he's a little gentleman. But the thing is, these are things that it's early in his life. He's really impressionable at this point, and it's going to be like long-lasting memories that you've cemented with him and created for him that he's going to look back on. And we are going to have this podcast for him to listen to, like how excited you were as his father to do these things with him. And this is what I really like about long-form content and stuff like this. This is evergreen. So like, for instance, you could go back and listen to whoever podcast that you like, whether it be Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss or any of these popular, pop culture, podcasts that are really, have blown up and have hundreds and thousands of episodes at this point. And you could listen to like their early beginnings and some of the memories that they have with different musicians and athletes or even friends of theirs. And it's almost like, one thing I really value about podcasting is that we've kind of cemented some of the memories that we've had, like the recaps of the PEC or, trips that we've had together, or even like experiences we've had in our own personal lives, and also our own evolutions as businessmen, as coaches, as men in general. And we've been able to get this, recorded live. And this is going to be something I'm really looking forward to when, we're a little bit older and more gray, later on down the road,
that.
100 episodes, and we're able to look back and see the growth that we've had.
Yeah, 100%, man. And, it's been, I be honest, man, there are moments I like pound my head into the wall as a father. I think everyone's kind of like that because, and I've just been really honest with my parenting with Keegan. I'm like, look, Keegan, I parent you as the dad I wish I had going through the things I never had a dad for. So for you, it seems hard, but I wish the man had sat me down and just said, hey, that's a dumb fucking thing. You don't want to do that. that's not what being a man is, or this is how you really handle your shit, or this is how you really handle your business as a man, and this is how kind of lonely it can be sometimes. Like I've had these very honest conversations. So he's gotten a lot better understanding like my job isn't to be best friend and party all the time, is to give him great experiences, but also help him understand that like life is a lesson. You learn it when you're through. So that's kind of how I've been approaching it. But with that being said, let's get into this before we get talking too deep, because we can just talk forever. Post-workout nutrition. I know, man, we have a good friendship, so it works. But post-workout nutrition, nutrient timing, and peri-workout nutrition series part 3. So over the last 2 weeks, we have done 2 different parts going over peri-workout nutrition, which is comprised of your pre-workout meal, your intra-workout nutrition, and your post-workout nutrition. So today we're going to talk on the first topic of the importance of dialing in our nutrition to optimize our recovery capacity. Because if you can't recover the workout, you have to ask yourself, was the workout an effective workout? And that's something that John Meadows told me once when I was training with him. And I was like, light bulb. He had a way for saying very complex things very simply. So I've always admired that about that man.
Immensely missed. I'll tell you that.
He is immensely missed. But that's kind of a little bit about that. But Pete, let's get into that, man. The importance of dialing in our nutrition to optimize our recovery capacity.
Absolutely. So I think it's, if we start off, I think it's safe to say that many of us started resistance training with the goal of building muscle and strength and improving our physiques. And when we first start training, the training stimulus is so novel and our bodies are so sensitive to this stimulus that often many of us are able to make progress, even if we don't have our training, our nutrition, or recovery dialed in. Hence, why this early phase of training is often referred to as our newbie gains phase. We're making gains regardless really of what we do. However, the longer we train, the more advanced we get in our training careers, the more variables we need to dial in and the more things we need to get right to see any sort of progress in terms of our strength and muscular development. And what a lot of individuals overlook is that the training in and of itself is the stimulus for building muscle and improving our physiques, but we don't actually grow in the gym. We don't make progress inside the gym. It's everything we do outside of the gym to recover from our training, which influences our ability to see the fruits of our labor and actually make tangible progress from what we do inside of the gym itself. And this is why we need to prioritize both our training and recovery, as we can improve off a dose of training, we can only improve off a dose of training that we can adequately recover from. And recovery should start as soon as the workout itself is done. So what we do after training, especially in terms of our approach to nutrition, will dictate how well we respond and adapt to the training we just completed, how well we can recover and adapt to it, and how hard we can push our next session in order to improve upon our previous training performances and ensure we're presenting our bodies with a progressive stimulus that challenges our muscles and our bodies enough to cause further muscular and strength adaptations. And recovery is important for so many reasons. It's needed to recuperate from our training so that we can adapt and grow from the training we've done, as well as lower the amount of time it takes to get back to an enhanced state of performance so we can continue training in a progressive fashion, which allows us to improve over time. But if our recovery isn't optimized and prioritized, it can do many things, like many negative, deleterious things. So it can impair our ability to adapt and respond to the stimulus of training. It can hinder our physique progression or our physique development in and of itself. It can limit our performance in subsequent sessions. It can result in excess muscle soreness or muscular damage. And it can cause fatigue to accumulate much quicker than it would if recovery was optimized. So basically, we'd be putting in the same amount of work or more, but not reaping the same rewards due to the lack of recovery. So post-workout is when the recovery process begins, and nutrition is one of the most effective tools in our arsenal that we can use to optimize our recovery so we can positively adapt to our training and grow as a result.
I have a question for you. Okay, because actually, okay, wait, I'm going to ask after this one. I think this one might be better. How to approach post-workout nutrition then? My question would be, is it better to eat a whole meal or is it better to eat a liquid meal? Because you're going to get asked.
All right, so we'll definitely go into that. But first, you know what?
Fair.
I think before we go into how do we approach this, we want to cover, because we kind of had a format to this. So we want to cover what are the goals of using post-workout nutrition, and then how do we approach it. So we go over the hierarchical principles that we need to integrate into this post-workout window per se, and then we'll go into how to approach it. So post-workout nutrition is not only important for recovery and restoration, but also for preparing for our next session. So there are essentially 4 goals and objectives we want to check off in the post-workout time period to maximize our post-exercise recovery. And these goals are referred to as the 4 R's, which include refueling, repairing, rehydrating, and resting. So first we want to refuel. And the process of refueling ourselves after training is done through consuming carbohydrates to replenish glycogen stores, both in the muscle and liver, and to refuel ourselves from an energy substrate perspective. Next, we want to accomplish the goal of repairing. And the repair process after training is mostly accomplished by consuming protein to stimulate muscle protein synthesis and to get out of a catabolic state of muscle breakdown, which is generally what we're in after the post-workout or post-training period. And so with that, we want to get in a complete protein source with all 9 essential amino acids. From there, we want to also rehydrate, which is going to be done through fluids and electrolytes, as we want to replace the fluid, the electrolytes, and the minerals that are lost during training itself. And then we want to get in sufficient rest after training. And this can be done by promoting restoration through activities like getting into a parasympathetic state, going for a walk, stretching, things of that sort. But also a major component of this recovery perspective from the rest, aspect is getting adequate sleep, which we're not going to go into this week as it's not really tied in closely with nutrition. However, it is a component that we need to make sure that we're dialing in, because it's not just about what we do in the gym and in terms of our meals, it's also about what we do outside of that window.
Okay. Then, so you said rehydrate. Go ahead. No, you go ahead. Go where you want to go. Because
no. Do you want me to go? Yeah. Do you want me to go into how to approach it?
Yeah. No, I want you to go into how to approach it. But I guess go ahead. Yeah, go that route.
Okay. So when it comes to how to approach our post-workout nutrition, we want to hit a lot of the goals that I just mentioned before. But from a nutritional perspective or a nutritional aspect, we want to focus primarily on refueling and repairing after training. So in order to accomplish this, we want our post-workout meal to include an ample amount of both protein and carbohydrates. So when it comes to refueling, we can accomplish this by consuming carbohydrates post-workout, which will help to refuel and replenish the glycogen stores that we used and depleted to fuel the resistance training we just completed. It's going to stimulate the production and the release of insulin, which will help with the delivery of amino acids into muscle. It also helps to minimize muscle protein breakdown and help lower cortisol production, so we can shift from this state of being, the state of catabolism essentially, to a state of anabolism, where we're building tissue and storing nutrients rather than breaking down tissue and oxidizing nutrients. And last but not least, ingesting carbs can help to replete energy stores, lower fatigue, and put us into more of a parasympathetic state, so we can enhance our recovery capacity and digestion. And since one of the main goals of the post-workout meal is to help improve recovery by also promoting muscle repair, we want to get into a state of positive muscle protein balance, meaning that our rates of muscle protein synthesis exceed our rates of muscle protein breakdown, so that we're in an anabolic environment that's conducive to build muscle rather than a catabolic environment, which would essentially be breaking muscle down. And so this process in and of itself can be accomplished by consuming a complete protein source to repair the tissue we've broken down during the training session, and also to maximize muscle protein synthesis so we can accrue new muscle tissue and reduce protein breakdown and degradation. Also, we're more sensitive to the effects of protein after training and can actually utilize a higher dose of it as compared to when we're in a non-trained state. So this is an opportunity for us to take advantage of this heightened state of sensitivity to amino acids that our muscles have by taking in a bolus dose of protein post-workout. And then we also want to rehydrate and replete the fluid and electrolytes lost through training. Now, when it comes to the topic of how to time our post-workout meal, this is something many have went back and forth about over the years. So, I'm sure you can remember this, Jeff, yourself, but when I was first coming into the industry, the concept of the post-workout anabolic window was extremely prominent. And this concept, basically, for anyone that out there that's a little bit newer into this game and didn't go through those, that time period where you had to rush to get your post-workout shake. And
you're immediately getting it on the gym floor, dude. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, the concept of the post-workout window, or the post-workout anabolic window, was basically what it did was it basically suggested that you needed to get a fast digesting source of both protein and carbs down within 30 to 60 minutes of finishing your last set of training, or you'd basically lose your gains, which now we look back and we're like, man, that's ridiculous. But that was really what was promoted, what was believed, and what we all implemented into our daily routines. But since that time, more research has been done on the topic of nutrient timing and post-workout nutrition in particular. And we've learned that what was once thought to be this very short window and this very small post-workout anabolic window is more like an anabolic garage door, meaning it's open for longer than we used to believe. So I'd suggest eating a post-workout meal within 1 to 2 hours of finishing your workout rather than rushing to get something down your throat immediately after finishing your last set, which is something I will admit I did. I used to carry a protein shake that was already pre-mixed on the floor. So
Yeah,
like the
no.
minute I finished my last set, whether it was squats or whatever it may be, nauseous or not, I was downing that shake. And this is something that it's not going to be counterproductive, or it's not going to harm your gains, but it's also not necessary. And so it's not that you can't consume nutrients right after training, as that won't hinder your gains by any means. But seeing as when we train intensely, we're in a sympathetic state of fight or flight, where our body is under stress, our digestion is going to be impaired. So, really, when we look at this, what's really happening is when we're in a state of fight or flight, we're actually training intensely. Our blood is being shunted away, or it's being essentially sequestrated into our muscles to deliver oxygen and nutrients into our muscle cells, rather than to our digestive tract. So what I found is that many clients will experience digestive issues or GI distress when they try to rush into eating right after training. So I personally, like how I approach this is I personally aim to get out of this sympathetic state and into a parasympathetic state of rest and digest prior to sitting down to consume my post-workout meal. As my goal with this meal is to be able to fully absorb the nutrients I'm taking in and using it to refuel and repair from training. But the thing is, we aren't just what we eat. We're what we, digest, we absorb, and we assimilate, which is especially important for those of us whose post-workout meal is the largest or one of the largest meals of their day. So what I'll do personally is usually what I'll do to get into a parasympathetic state is to do a cool down after training, which is something I went over in last week's podcast. And what I often will also do is I'll listen to something that's relaxing on my ride home from the gym to calm down my nervous system. And then I'll usually sit down and eat my post-workout meal really slowly to try to optimize digestion of these nutrients. Now, here's the thing. I realize that not everyone has the ability to take the extra time to do this. So when I do have a client who has a really tight schedule or needs to eat their post-workout quickly due to training before heading to work or needing to get into the office or to pick up their kids or whatever it may be, I'll just have them do something like some deep breathing or take a few minutes to chill out after the gym. It could be just going for a walk, like a slow walk, to really get themselves into this parasympathetic state and get them into rest and digest before they eat. And now, when it comes to how to construct our pre-workout meal from an application perspective, so this is really how do we approach this? We want to prioritize both a bolus of protein and carbohydrates. And so we want to get a complete protein source, which contains all of the amino acids, especially the 9 essential amino acids in this post-workout meal, so we can fully stimulate and maximize muscle protein synthesis. So generally, I'll do that by either consuming a whole food animal source of protein or a whey protein shake. And I will combine this bolus dose of protein with a dose of carbohydrates. And generally, what I tend to do for both myself and my clients is to allocate our largest dose of carbohydrates for the day in this post-workout meal, as we're the most insulin sensitive and receptive to carbohydrates right after training. And I also try to prioritize both digestion and absorption with this post-workout meal. So when it comes to like carb sources that I choose, what I like to do is I like to combine multiple transportable carbs, meaning I'll pair a glucose source of carbohydrates with a fructose source. And the reason for this is we have actually a limit to how much glucose we can take in and absorb at one time. So we can absorb around 1 gram of glucose per minute or 60 grams per hour into the small intestine. But if you take in a meal that far exceeds that amount, so say that your post-workout meal is 120 grams of carbohydrates or 150 grams of carbohydrates. I have some guys that are eating 200 grams of carbohydrates. That's going to essentially saturate your SGLT1 transporters, which limits the amount of carbs you can absorb and deliver. So by using multiple transportable carbs, which are a combination of carbs that utilize different intestinal transporters for delivery, we can bypass this issue. So by combining a glucose-based carb source with a fructose-containing carb source, we can increase carbohydrate absorption, getting a higher dose of carbs more effectively and efficiently, and can have less potential for GI distress from ingesting high amounts of carbs, and as fructose uses a different transport system than glucose and is transported and absorbed through the GLUT5 transporter, which is not affected by the saturation of the SGLT1 transporter. And this is why I'll often include fruit as one of my carb sources post-workout. Is most fruit sources, if you look at them, they're usually like a 50-50 split of fructose to glucose. So they allow us to take advantage of utilizing this GLUT5 transport. And fructose is also an effective way to replenish both liver glycogen and muscle glycogen. And this is something actually, I had this conversation often with clients because they'll be like, why are we eating fruit post-workout? And what a lot of individuals don't realize is that fruit will help with replenishing muscle glycogen, but seeing as it's a 50-50 split of fructose to glucose. Fruit is more effective for replenishing liver glycogen and just as effective as glucose for replenishing muscle glycogen. So it's actually been shown that liver glycogen repletion rates are approximately doubled with the ingestion of a glucose fructose mix over just the ingestion of glucose by itself. So if you combine the two, you're going to have double the absorption or the restoration of your liver glycogen first and foremost. But also, even if you're someone who doesn't have the time to, cook a whole food meal after your workout and can only take in, say, a protein shake and a bolus dose of fruit, you'll still be able to replenish glycogen stores within 24 hours of your training session. And there have studies that have compared glucose and sucrose against each other. And if you look at sucrose, it's pretty much the same thing as fruit. So when we look at it from like a molecular standpoint, it's 50% split of fructose and 50% split of glucose. And when they've looked at each carb source's ability to restore glycogen and the difference in rate of glycogen resynthesis between the two, it's pretty much negligible. So you can go with glucose or you can go with a combination. You're going to still get that same muscle glycogen replenishment benefit. And this is beneficial to know for those who are either short on time when it comes to their post-workout meal, or for those that are in a fat loss phase and they're limited on their total calorie intake, as fruit is a great way to get in a quality carbohydrate source that has low energy density, it's loaded with micronutrients, and also helps with satiety and hunger management. Now, when it comes to consuming fats post-workout, if you're glycogen depleted from training, so if you really went through like a long, exhausting bout of training, you've really depleted a lot of glycogen, taking in the fats post-workout may slow down glycogen replenishment, but it won't actually impair glycogen replenishment. So it's not that you're not going to be able to replenish glycogen. It's just not going to help it happen or allow it to happen as effectively and as quickly. However, I generally don't see the need or benefit from including fats in the post-workout meal, as there really isn't any muscle building advantage. There is no recovery or performance advantage to adding them in compared to just consuming protein and carbs post-workout, which are really the two most beneficial nutrients to ingest after training. And whether or not we include fats in a post-workout meal would really come down to what phase a client is in, how many calories they're taking in, so their total caloric intake and their availability and their goals. But when I really look at it or I think about it, like for my own clients, I tend to distribute their fat away from the peri-workout window, especially during dieting phases, instead of taking fats and calories out of their other meals of the day and adding it post-workout, which is already their highest calorie meal of the day. That's going to have the largest percentage of carbs for that day. So really, like, my mindset with this is, why would I add extra calories from fat in this post-workout meal when it's already a large meal? I would rather take those fat calories and bias them away from that peri-workout window in other parts of the day where they're eating lower calorie meals, and that could allow them to have more of a satiating meal by adding fats in those, exterior meals rather than within that peri-workout window. And even when it comes to like a building phase, I still don't really see a benefit to adding fats post-workout, as they do delay and slow down digestion. So if I have someone who's in a surplus and who's already eating like a large post-workout meal, that's say 50 grams of protein and maybe 150 grams of carbohydrates, taking a large dose of fat is just going to slow down digestion and potentially impair their appetite for their subsequent meals. So really, there is no benefit to taking in fats during that period. And that's where we really look at nutrient timing from a multi-pronged perspective. What we've really been focusing on this podcast is nutrient timing around the peri-workout window. And that's where fats aren't as beneficial. It's really about protein and carbohydrates, as we covered in the pre-workout podcast, the intra-workout podcast, and now this post-workout podcast. And really, when it would come down to fat timing and as well as fiber timing, like fibrous carb sources, it would really be on those meals that are outside of this peri-workout window.
We have on here glycogen depletion during exercise, the benefits consuming carbs post workout. You kind of weave some of that in there. So I'll let you tease out those 2 points how you want to, because you did a really good job kind of tying it in. I felt it was done really well, but I want to make sure we get those two.
Absolutely. Thank you, my man. Yeah. So when it comes to glycogen depletion during exercise, this was actually one of the questions I received from the audience in regards to our last two parts of this nutrient timing and peri-workout nutrition series. And really what the question in terms of glycogen depletion is I got a question that was in terms of the time course of glycogen depletion and replenishment, and whether we should be focusing on replenishing glycogen after training. Now, when we really look at it, we can replete glycogen stores in 24 hours as long as an adequate amount of carbs are consumed in the 24 hours after training. So we don't necessarily have to consume carbs immediately post-workout, but delaying carb intake after training by 2 or more hours post-workout can actually decrease glycogen resynthesis rates by about 50% according to research. So we're just delaying this process and making it longer than it needs to be by not taking in carbs post-workout. So really, there is no benefit to doing so. It just will slow down the process. However, By taking in a combination of both protein and carbohydrates post-workout, we can actually get an increase in glycogen resynthesis more than just consuming carbs alone. And we also have this upregulation in glucose uptake post-workout, where more of our carbohydrates are going to go into muscle tissue rather than being stored in other compartments. So really in my mind, like when I think about this concept, I'm like, why wouldn't we take advantage and utilize carbs post-workout when in that post-workout meal, when we have all these benefits? And now when it comes to glycogen depletion goes, this was another question that we got from the audience. We have to realize that glycogen is not something that's stored uniformly in muscle, as there are distinct areas in the muscle where glycogen is stored. So there's essentially three components or compartments where we can store glycogen, and that's the intramyofibrillar glycogen stores, the intermyofibrillar glycogen stores, and the subsarcolemma glycogen stores. So there's really three compartments within each muscle that we can actually store muscle glycogen in per se. So they're all specific, and often when you hear people talk about muscle glycogen, they're just saying it in general. They're just talking about total muscle glycogen content. They're not really going into the more nuanced aspects of this. And this is where a lot of times you'll hear, oh, resistance training doesn't really deplete glycogen that much. However, if you actually look into the more in-depth research on this, you'll see that we have research that really debates what a lot of people will say out there. And if you really look into it in much greater detail, you'll see that there are quite substantial glycogen depletion during resistance training. So there's research that shows that these compartments, so these three compartments, get depleted at different rates and can have different effects on muscle force output and training performance. And that intramyofibrillar glycogen stores seem to be the most important for training performance. So there's a recent study that came out by Hawken that looked into each compartment to see the effects resistance training can have on glycogen depletion. And in this study, they took well-trained lifters and put them on a moderate volume workout. But it was one, like, if you actually look at like the study design, it really was like moderate volume. You just moderate rep ranges. I think it was between 5 and 12 reps per set. So it wasn't even like they were using really high rep sets that were really like glycolytic or really going to be depleting glycogen. And they found that by the end of this moderate volume session, total muscle glycogen decreased by 38%. And this is on par with what we see in much of the literature. When they talk about total muscle glycogen, we see between like 24 and 40% depletion from one bout of resistance training. However, the caveat to this finding is that the depletion in type 2 fibers and within the intramyofibrillar stores dropped by 54%. So more than by half by this one moderate volume training session. So half of them were substantially depleted. So although total muscle glycogen was depleted by 38%, there was a significant amount more in the fibers that we need most for our training performance within resistance training. So the issue with the amount of glycogen depletion in these specific fibers is that by them getting depleted more than others, they contribute more to fatigue and can impact our training performance, our force production, and our total work output. And the same research group has demonstrated that reduced intramyofibrillar glycogen is associated with impaired calcium release, which increases muscle fatigue and reduces our capacity to contract muscle, which is why we should really look at glycogen depletion and replenishment in a more nuanced view. So this is where utilizing and leveraging our carb intake during specific times around the training window can be beneficial to replenish these depleted glycogen stores so that training performance isn't detrimentally impacted by foregoing carbs after sessions. And this doesn't mean, like I'm really with this, I want to make this clear. I'm not promoting that everyone has to do a high carb diet because it's really going to be based on the training phase, your goal. If you're in a fat loss phase, you just might not have the calories to have a vastly high amount of carbohydrates. However, I think really when it comes down to it, in terms of the timing of your nutrients, whatever carbohydrate intake you do have, that it's really beneficial to look at the workout window as well as the type of training you're doing and your training volume, your intensity and frequency, and then utilizing, more of a nutrient timing approach to benefit and leverage these benefits as much as possible. And also, if you're in a diet, replenishing glycogen post-workout is going to be even more important due to the low amount of total energy you're consuming on a daily basis. So these are all, things and considerations that we need to make. Now, when it comes to do we need to take carbs post-workout, this is something I want to turn over to you, Jeff, and hear your thoughts on this. I know that you've utilized many different philosophies, and I'll share my take in a minute after I get a drink. But I want to hear your things because this was actually an audience question. They wanted to know: listen, you've been really promoting carbohydrates both pre and intra workout. Do you think it's necessary to consume post workout? So I want to get your thoughts on it.
Well, I think it depends upon what you're trying to do. I, for the most part, with most people, tend to do very balanced carbs all throughout the day and keep people's blood sugars level. Just kind of depends upon the phase, but I personally will put more carbs front into the workout and then kind of taper them off to the back. So meaning like say 80 before they work out, 60 while they're working out, and then 40 on the back. And had some pretty decent results of that. Now, if you go polypharmacy and you start playing with insulin and growth hormone, this changes it like a
Absolutely.
lot. And people don't realize that, but it does. And I think it really just matter if, like me, post workout, if I do more than like 80, I usually have sluggish blood sugar, stuff like that. So I think it's a matter of finding out what people's like after you work out, give it 30 minutes and see what your blood sugar levels are at, eat if they're decent, and then see where you're at an hour later and 2 hours later. And I think you could kind of start finding out how much you really need, because I think if you spill up into like 130s and 140s, and you get these high numbers, 2 hours later, you're sitting at 110, 120. I'm like, it's probably too many carbs. Is how I tend to look at it from a blood glucose response. So I tend to use those kind of metrics, but that's how I kind of figure out where I want to put my carbohydrates with people.
Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. I always like getting other people's takes because I have a very different approach to this. I actually do the exact opposite. Most of my, when I look at really nutrient timing from like a specific carbohydrate perspective, I'm really thinking about the physiology of what we're doing from a training perspective. And so really I'm allocating the majority of my carbohydrate intake and my clients' carbohydrate intake, granted that they're healthy and insulin sensitive, in that peri-workout window, but the largest bolus of carbohydrates is going to go post-workout. And so I always like getting other people's approaches because I have certain interpretation based off all the research I've went into, but we all have different, and this is what, is really unique about doing a podcast or engaging with other coaches, is we all work with different populations. We have different client backgrounds. We have different avatars that we work with. And so we have different experiences and we have different approaches as a result. And it's not that one is correct over the other. It's just that we've looked at different literature and we've also tried different approaches and gotten different outcomes. But when it comes to like this question, what the audience was asking, if you're asking me for my perspective or what I've seen in the research, really when I'm looking at, is it necessary or what are the benefits per se of including and consuming carbs post workout? I really come from the consideration of the fact that resistance training is an anaerobic activity, which depletes our glycogen stores. So I believe that there's a lot of benefits we can derive by including carbohydrates in our post workout meal. So post-workout carbs are not only beneficial from a recovery and replenishment aspect after resistance training, but resistance training in and of itself provides a ton of metabolic benefits that makes it more advantageous to consume carbs after completing a training session, as resistance training upregulates many of the processes involved in increasing glucose uptake. So if we're going to eat a higher amount of carbs at any point in the day, doing so post-workout when our muscles are at their highest state of insulin sensitivity is the best time to do so. Which is why I'll generally bias a larger percentage of my daily carb intake post-workout. And there's also a ton of benefits to leveraging carbs post-workout, as training increases glucose uptake, nutrient partitioning, and insulin sensitivity through upregulating the GLUT4 pathway. So the translocation of GLUT4 transporters is upregulated through both resistance training and physical activity. So when we've trained, we've primed our muscles to uptake glucose and convert it into stored glycogen in the muscle in order to replenish those glycogen stores that we've depleted through our training sessions. And so when we really look at it, like when you look at it in normal physiology, in an untrained state, GLUT4 transporters are usually what's called insulin dependent, meaning these transporters usually will translocate to the edge of our muscle cell to allow glucose in when insulin is elevated and is binded to the insulin receptor. However, when we train, and specifically when we contract skeletal muscle, we activate a non-insulin mediated form of GLUT4 translocation, which allows our muscles to pull glucose in without the need for insulin, which is one of the main ways that resistance training increases insulin sensitivity, because it lowers the need for our body to produce high levels of insulin to absorb nutrients. So when we finish training, we're primed to absorb more carbohydrates, even if insulin is low. However, by taking in carbs, we also raise endogenous, so natural insulin production, which in and of itself enhances the uptake and shuttling of carbohydrates and amino acids into muscle. So there's like this multi-pronged benefit to taking in carbs post-workout, both from a non-insulin mediated and an insulin mediated pathway. So we're getting the benefits of both. We're leveraging both, endogenous insulin production, but then also not relying on over secretion of insulin to upregulate and transport these nutrients into the cell. So this upregulation in GLUT4 translocation and glycogen synthesis is transient. So what that means is it really doesn't last for long. So this is why we want to take advantage of this effect. And if we want to do so, we want to eat within 1 to 2 hours of our training sessions, because if not, these GLUT4 transporters will relocate and move away from the edge of the cell. So knowing this, I personally will bias the majority of my daily carb intake around that peri-workout window, as I mentioned before. And then what I actually do is I taper my carb dose per meal and the meals outside of this training window. And this is also important because muscle damage and DOM specifically can interfere with insulin sensitivity and actually limit glycogen resynthesis. But when we actually look at like the DOMS research, delayed onset muscle soreness, most people will think of that and they'll think that it happens 24 or 48 hours after training. That's when we generally feel it most, but actually DOMS usually doesn't kick in until around 6 hours after training. So in those hours after training, before that 6 hour mark, we can take advantage and put more carbs in before our ability to resynthesize glycogen goes down. And glycogen resynthesis is dependent on many things. And so another benefit of consuming carbs post-workout is to increase glycogen resynthesis and replenish glycogen stores, which helps with the recovery, as well as ensuring we have ample reserves for our next training session, especially if you train with a higher frequency where you're hitting multiple body parts each session and also potentially hitting multiple body parts each week. So you're utilizing a higher frequency in which you train the same muscle group maybe multiple times per week. And then also, this is something that's more for like people that are really body composition focused or competitors, but many of us engage in 2-a-day training. We don't even think about it as such. But if you are someone that's doing both a cardio session, like you are right now, Jeff, I'm sure you're doing cardio and then you're also doing resistance training, but you're doing it at separate times in the day. Am I right?
I do fasted morning cardio and I do hit post workout with more steps afterwards to cool down and get in parasympathetic state so my body can digest after I eat.
Absolutely. So that is an example. And a lot of people don't think about it because they're like, oh, it's cardio and resistance training. They only think about that training once per day, but you're technically doing 2-a-day training. So when you're doing both resistance and cardio sessions at different times of the day, you're going to want to replete glycogen post-workout so that you have energy reserves for those subsequent sessions. So overall, if you do have the carbs available in your diet, putting a large portion of them post-workout will enable you to take advantage of the benefits of carbohydrates within this post-workout window where glucose uptake is increased, which will allow you to accelerate recovery by lowering muscle protein breakdown and lowering cortisol levels, which are high after training. They allow you to replenish glycogen stores quicker, and they also get yourself into this parasympathetic state where you can help to recover your nervous system quicker.
All right, I guess that takes us to the last one, which is probably the most important one, is do we need to eat after training?
You skip one, my man.
Well, we're running out of time, but okay.
I'll go over quickly the research.
Oh, yeah, you're cool. I thought you, because you jumped around so much on these, I figured that you were folding them in, sprinkling.
Oh, no, all good. I just want to go over it just because there is a lot of debate on nutrient timing. Is this efficacious? And a lot of things we have to realize that research hasn't, there's a lot of mechanistic research that we have on this, but I really wanted to include something that was really applicable to what we all do and being able to show that, yes, there are a lot of nuanced aspects to nutrient timing. However, really, we can implement this quite simply into our routine and reap vast benefits from it. So when it comes to the research on the benefits of specifically using a nutrient timing approach where nutrients are timed around the peri-workout window and consumed pre and post workout, one of the most convincing studies is from the lab of Paul Cribb. And in this study, they took resistance trained males and first put them all on the same training program for 6 weeks prior to employing any nutritional interventions. And this was done to familiarize them, each of them, to the training program in and of itself and the training stimulus. So what they did was they essentially put them on this training program so that they got past that initial period of making neurological adaptations, so that when they transitioned into the second part of the study, when they would use and implement a different nutritional approach, they would be able to show that the results they saw were specifically due to the nutritional approach they use, not just due to the novelty of a new training program. So we all know that, like, when you first transition to a new training program, you can often see gains in strength, maybe gains in lean body mass if you're a new trainee, but they actually took all these confounders out. They used resistance trained individuals that weren't going to have newbie gains. They acclimated them to a training program so that they weren't seeing these strength increases just due to changing to new exercise. And they really made a really clean, approach to this training study where it was really down to nutrient timing. So after this 6-week period of just training, the researchers split the trainees up into 2 groups and put them on the same training program for 10 weeks. And in one group, subjects received a protein and carb supplement that was timed pre and post workout. And in the other group, they received the same protein and carb supplement, but rather they timed it in the morning and the evening. So really, when we look at it from a timing perspective, the pre and post workout group had it say an hour before and after training, but the other group that was receiving the same amount of calories, the same amount of carbohydrates, the same amount of protein, they just received it about 5 hours outside the training window. But each group was equated for calories, protein, and carbohydrates. And after the 10-week study, they found that the nutrient timing group who had taken the pre and post workout nutrition approach had greater gains in lean body mass, bench and squat 1 rep max, and muscle fiber cross-sectional area. And they also took muscle biopsies and saw greater amounts of myofibrillar protein content and glycogen content within the muscle. So despite the groups, taking in the same amount or the same exact amount of protein, carbs, supplement, and having the same total daily protein intakes, the only difference being the timing that they consumed it in, they were able to get a vast benefit from the difference in approaches. So really, when it comes down to it, calories and macros were equated, they were the same, but the timing of these nutrients in relation to their training sessions played an influential role in the gains these trainees made from the same exact training program, which shows a pure timing effect and the potential benefits we can reap from dialing in some of the more nuanced aspects of nutrition and using pre and post workout nutrition. Now, when it comes to the question, which was another audience question, do we need to eat after training? Because there are certain people that they're in a fasting window, or there's someone that they just rush to work and they overlook it for a few hours. I think we need to look at what occurs during and after a resistance training session to conclude whether post-workout nutrition is needed or not. And this is really being done because we have to think conceptually and then also think about how it applies in the real world. And so when we look at a bout of resistance training exercise, we experience an increase in both muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown after exercise. So both of these areas are elevated post-workout. Now, the issue with not eating after training, especially when it comes to not at least taking in a complete protein source, is that despite muscle protein synthesis being elevated from the training itself, protein breakdown is elevated as well. So not taking in protein, if you don't take in protein, we aren't able to get into a state of positive protein balance where our levels of muscle protein synthesis exceed our levels of protein breakdown, which allows us to build new muscle proteins. So when we resistance train, but we don't eat after, and especially if we don't eat protein, you don't get a protein serving after, we've stimulated protein synthesis, but we actually increase muscle breakdown as well, not only through training itself, but also because we need to increase our protein breakdown rates to supply the amino acids needed for that increase in synthesis. So we're actually breaking down more of our own tissue to be able to supply those amino acids because we need to get them endogenously rather than exogenously through the diet because we haven't supplied them. So there's no net gain in muscle proteins as both synthesis and breakdown are increased. So now we're at like this net balance, essentially. We're not in a state of positive protein balance. And then also, we have research by Bird that looked at muscle protein synthesis rates after exercise along different time points and compared what those rates look like when a person was either fasted or fed. And his series, he did a full series of studies on this. And what they found was that resistance training on its own will increase, muscle protein synthesis as compared to being in a rested state or a non-exercise state, essentially. But this elevation of muscle protein synthesis levels from baseline is substantially higher when we eat after training as compared to when we don't eat. And this study found that we have heightened sensitivity to protein intake post-workout and an augmented and enhanced muscle protein synthesis response, which is highest when eating in the 3 or so hours after training. So muscle protein synthesis rates from consuming protein are still elevated for up to 24 hours after training, but it isn't as high as it is in those first 3 hours post-workout. So this is really where we get a benefit from consuming, at least a protein serving in that post-workout window and eating after training. So really, there's no reason to not have a meal or at least a protein feeding post-workout, as there's only potential benefits that we can leverage and no inherent drawbacks to doing so. So I often receive like these questions, whether, about a specific strategy is necessary or not, which I think is a little bit of a silly question, as nothing besides getting enough calories, essential amino acids, and essential fatty acids is technically necessary. So if we really think about it from like a survival perspective, nothing but those essential nutrients is necessary. However, when it comes to optimizing our body composition outcomes through a nutritional approach, which is why we wanted to cover this topic, there's so many details that many overlook within their approach to nutrition, and then they wonder why they're not seeing the results they desire. And this is something like even with that study by Cribb, where you can literally just shift the same nutrients that you're taking in and utilize them pre and post workout and allocate them a little bit better in terms of your timing and your approach to doing so, and get large increases in the results, your recovery, and also your lean body mass gains just from a timing perspective. So it's kind of like, if it's beneficial and has no harm, why not implement it? So overall, post-workout nutrition, when it comes to eating post-workout, it's definitely something I advise. And also it's something that even if you're skeptical or you're someone that doesn't like eating post-workout, it's why not try it and see the benefits or see if you experience potential benefits from doing it.
I actually think that the peri-workout nutrition is the first area that people should maximize once they get past the beginner phase of working out. I think
Absolutely.
that's a good intermediate area for people to work at. And I think it's a really good area as far as where to maximize your supplement money. Just my kind of thoughts on all that. Where can everybody find you at, man?
Yeah, but feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at Brandon DeCruz _ or your email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. As always, guys, we want to thank you for listening to the podcast, always showing us support. We've gotten a lot of great feedback on this series in particular. So we really hope that you like this final, tie up of the series in and of itself. And we'd really love it if you took a screenshot, you shared the show, and also if you tagged us in your stories when you do share the show, so that other people can experience and find this cost-free educational content that we deliver on a weekly basis. But other than that, Jeff, tie us on out, my man.
Ladies and gentlemen, like B said, if you guys are more than willing, be sure to share us, rate us, all that good stuff. We definitely really appreciate it. But with that being said, I can be found at Jeff Unbreakable Black on Instagram, and you're more likely to find me on YouTube now a lot. Relentless forever. So anyway, that was a good one, man. I appreciate taking the time to join us.
Absolutely.
Peace,
Always a
dude.
pleasure, my man.
All right, you take care, guys.